Alright guys, today we're going to be talking about communication, behavior, and learning. There's a lot of vocab in here, so I'll be going over some of those vocab terms and give you guys some examples, and you're going to have to apply them to things later in this unit. So remember that we're just focusing on animal behavior in this one. So one important term to know is a signal. So what a signal is, it's a transmission of a stimulus from one animal to another. A stimulus, if you guys remember back to when we were talking about characteristics of living things, it's sort of an external or internal cue for something. The example that I have is a canine bowing. So for those of you who have dogs or have played with dogs before, you guys know that when a dog does this, and in yoga they call this downward dog, named after dogs, but when a dog does this and starts wagging his or her tail, what that is meant is for the recipient to know, hey, this dog is sending me the signal that he or she wants to play. This is not aggressive. This is not a threat, so forth. So that's an example of a signal. Signals are needed in communication. And what communication is, it's when there is a transmission of, reception of, and response to signals. So you have to have that sequence in order for it to be communication. If signals are sent out there but they're not received or responded to, it's not really considered communication. So anyways, the example that I have for you is yellow jackets. Now I've been dealing with yellow jackets on my property for a long time. These guys like to make nests in the ground. And one thing about yellow jackets is that they are in this eusocial network. This term right here, what that means is truly social. So they have like a hierarchy within their nest. So they have workers, they have things that protect their nests and all sorts of things. You guys have heard of queens. So in order for eusocial networks to survive, they all have to communicate with each other. And one of the things about yellow jackets that you may or may not know is that when a yellow jacket feels threatened, what the yellow jacket will do, and most likely this is the girls, but what will usually happen is they will release a pheromone. And a pheromone is just like a chemical signal that's put out into the environment. So if you see a yellow jacket and you swat at it or it feels threatened by you, what it will do is it will release a pheromone, or if you squash it. Okay, so if you squash it, this pheromone is also released. And when the rest of the hive or nearby yellow jackets receive that signal, that pheromone signal, they'll respond by swarming. So this is why you should never kill or swat at a yellow jacket. You just kind of have to like get out of its way, because they will hurt. So that's an example of communication. And unfortunately, I've been stung by many of those things. All right. Behavior. What behavior is an action carried out by muscles or glands under the control of the nervous system in response to a stimulus. You can also summarize it by the sum of an animal's responses to external and internal stimuli. So this is a unique behavior that we see. So these, if you guys don't know what kind of animals these are elephant seals, and it's actually 2 male elephant seals. And so how elephant seals typically live is there's one male in an area, and they have what is called a harem of females. And this one male fertilizes the females. All the pups are his offspring. And when another male sees an approaching male, what will happen is that they fight. Okay, so they see that that one male, resident male, will see the approaching male, and then his response is to fight. You got to think about why they're doing this. They will usually fight to the death. If you've ever seen videos of it, they're pretty bloody. So the loser will either die or, leaves. And you have to think about, well, why would they do that? Like, why would they want to do this? But it is because, like, think about biology and evolution. So the resident male gets to pass on his or her genes. Okay, so that is the sort of motivation behind this sort of behavior. So keep that in mind too. Like, why does nature favor, these types of behaviors? All right. So from you guys have read about and seen videos on behavior, and it's a spectrum. All right, so we have really simple behavior like we saw in the pill bugs, like kinesis and taxis, and those are a type of innate behavior. So innate behaviors essentially are behaviors that are not learned. Instead, they are under strong genetic control. Otherwise, you're just born with them. All animals have these, okay? The example that I have for you, if you guys know me well, you guys know that I love sea turtles, and I've spent many years doing sea turtle conservation on the Georgia coast. But sea turtles, when they are born, they have the instinct to crawl out of their nest. They still have that stimulus, they still have that cue as to initiate this behavior, and usually that's like a temperature cue. So when they're ready to come out of the eggs, they won't actually start crawling out of the nest until the temperature drops. So this is usually why sea turtles will hatch and crawl towards the sea at night, or when it's like a really cold rain in the summer. So there's no one around to show that. You know, the mom just lays the eggs and then she leaves. And about 60 days later, these guys just literally crawl out and go towards the sea. There's no one to show them that. They just know how to do it on their own. And you have to think about why. Like, why would that benefit them? And the answer is like they have to be in the ocean. That's where they're going to find their food. That's where they're going to find their mates, and etc. So this is an example of innate behavior. There's also learning. If you guys know about, if you've taken psychology, you guys know about the Skinner box. Learning is the modification of behavior based on specific experiences. And there's different types of learning. This rat right here is a famous experiment. Skinner, a psychologist, wanted to see if he could train a rat. When this rat would press a lever, it would either get food or water. And you got to think about like, okay, so how is that learning? Well, you know, levers have nothing to do with food. So when this rat first found that out, he associated and paired those two things. So he knew, or she knew, that anytime they would press this lever, they would either get food or water. So they're going to modify their behavior based on that. So they know, hey, anytime I press this, I'm going to get a treat. So I'm going to keep on doing it, and it's going to reinforce that. So that's an example of learning. There's a couple different types of learning. We're going to talk about 4. One is called classical conditioning. Classical conditioning is when an animal has an involuntary response. So involuntary means that they cannot control it, and it is associated to a stimulus. If you guys have ever heard the story of Pavlov's dog, it's a very famous study in psychology. You know, psychology is all about like how the brain works, how the mind works. And what is happening here is that before anything happened, anytime a dog would see food, and you guys know this, you have pets, dogs would start salivating, start getting hungry because they know that they're about to eat. So what Pavlov did was he would ring a bell, and then the dog would hear the bell, but then he would introduce the food anytime he rang the bell. So he kept doing that. You know, he would ring the bell, dog would get food. Ring the bell, dog would get food. And then every time they saw that food, they would associate it with, anytime that they would hear that bell, they would associate it with food. So they'd start salivating. It got to the point that after he conditioned it, he would just ring the bell and the dog would automatically pair that stimulus to getting food, so they'd start salivating. There's a very famous and really sad example called the Little Albert experiment. If you guys have time or are interested, look it up. This psychologist, before there was some ethical testing rules put into place, he used his own child, a 9-month-old, and what he would do is show the 9-month-old like this funny, cute little bunny, and you know, the child get all excited, but as soon as he petted that bunny, the psychologist would ring this really loud noise. They would clang to iron bars. And so over time, the little Albert, the little 9-month-old boy, anytime he would see anything like white and fuzzy, even Santa Claus, he would associate it with that really loud bang and would just start crying before the noise was ever made. So he was like scared to death of bunnies, white things, and Santa Claus for the rest of his life. Like I said, that was really sad. If you're interested, look it up. Okay, another one is called operant conditioning. And operant conditioning is sort of like trial and error. The animal is going to modify its voluntary behavior. Okay, so they choose to do this in response to a consequence of behavior. This is like sort of how the PBIS thing is working at school. You know, we reward you for doing some good things, and you're going to continue to do those good things. So that's the psychology behind that. So the classic example is training dogs. So if you guys have ever trained a dog or an animal in your life, you guys know how this works. You try to get a dog to do a trick, whether it be shake, bark, roll over, whatever. And then you reward that with a treat. And so that animal is going to modify its behavior. as compared to classical conditioning is that you cannot control your behavior in that response. So like little Albert, poor little guy, could not control him crying. Okay, so couldn't control himself crying after he'd been conditioning to associate little white fuzzy things with loud clings. Habituation is kind of interesting. We're all doing this right now. So if there's nothing that serves you, okay, so if there's any sort of stimulus that isn't a threat to your life or there's no benefit, what you'll actually learn to do over time is ignore it. So I have a picture right here of these houses that live next to railroad tracks. I actually have experienced this myself. One of my houses that I moved to in Georgia when we moved from out west was near train tracks. And the first couple of weeks that I lived there, I would hear trains all the time, and it would just like keep me up, wake me up. But over time, I learned to ignore them because the hearing of a train wasn't a threat to my life or it wasn't a good thing. So your body starts to tune them out. While you're sitting there listening to this, see if you can feel your clothes on your back. You probably can now that I've drawn your attention to them, but previous to this, you were just ignoring them because it doesn't really serve you or it's not a threat to your life or benefit whether or not you have clothes. Hearing your heartbeat in your ears, you kind of just tune it out. So things like this. If you've ever noticed going over to someone's house, it has a particular smell, but the people that live there, they can't smell that smell because they have been habituated. All right, observational learning. This is like kind of higher up on the hierarchy of behavior. Okay, so this is going to be a more sophisticated type of behavior. What you're going to see in observational learning is that you see something or another animal doing something, and then you modify your behavior based on that. So, for instance, we see this a lot in primates. Primates will see another monkey use a tool. So this is very sophisticated. So they'll use a tool like a rock or something, and they'll use it to sort of crush nuts. Other primates or monkeys will see that, and then they'll modify their behavior. They'll start using rocks to crush nuts. So it's a type of sophisticated behavior. Moving onward, it says, what is fitness? Now remember, what I told you guys to do is sort of think about like, why do animals do this? Like, why do we exhibit certain types of behavior? And it all has to do with something called fitness. So if you think back to natural selection, you probably have heard of the survival of the fittest. So what fitness is differential reproduction. Differential reproduction is a super fancy term that just means that there's some animals that can produce more offspring than other animals. So that's what differential reproduction is. It's whoever has the most babies and those babies can survive is sort of the winner. And that's really what it's about in biology. So the term is the ability to produce more offspring harboring their genes that encodes for a particular behavior trait or characteristic. So if there is a certain type of behavior that benefits an organism to live long and reproduce, those genes for that behavior are going to get passed down to the next generation. And so that's kind of like why we see certain behaviors exist. So I want you guys to keep thinking about that as we go through it. All right. So if you have any questions, email me. You're going to have an assignment based on, you guys are going to act out a skit, and you're going to act out a particular behavior with some groups. So after you read this and go through this, get with your groups and follow your next project. Email me if you have questions, guys.